Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us this week on Market Journal. I'm Bryce Duskett. Welcome into the month of May. For most producers, planters were left parked this week as welcome rain fell across the region. Wherever you may find yourself today, we sure appreciate you joining us here on the program. Kicking things off this week, drought and wildfires have been an increasing threat to many Nebraskans this year. It's not known just yet how much damage the recent fires have caused. However, some consequences are already clearly apparent. In some cases, pastures have been left scorched, fences and irrigation systems have been destroyed, and livestock losses are being counted. In order to mitigate these mounting losses, USDA is offering assistance to farmers and ranchers impacted by drought and wildfires. Producers impacted by these events should contact their local USDA service center to report losses and learn more about program options available to assist in their recovery from losses and damages.
So we're really looking at things in two different chunks. The first is we have a number of different programs related to livestock that I think are going to be helpful to producers out there on the ground that have experienced losses. We've got the LIP program, the Livestock Indemnity Program. We've got the ELAP program, the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program. We've got LFP, which has also triggered because of drought. The LFP program is a livestock forage program to help with forage losses in those areas as well. So I think that we've got kind of a well-rounded package of assistance for livestock. Those folks have also experienced some losses with fencing, and that's a pretty critical need as they put back together their operations. And so we've got the emergency conservation program for fencing that will also be made available to them. On the cropping side, we're experiencing, I think a lot of people are experiencing a great deal of concern about how they're going to proceed forward. What happened when these fires went through is they not only burnt off all that residue, but they also burnt up a lot of inputs that had recently been applied as people were prepping for seeding their spring crops. Right now we're working with our Washington office to see how we might be able to assist those folks, but we don't have anything real concrete yet. But we're going to be working with people on the ground and people in Washington to see if we can get something figured out for them.
While your operation might not have been impacted by those wildfires, in many areas of Nebraska, they're currently dealing with the ramifications of drought. With the limited precipitation we've experienced through the early stages of the spring, it is believed that drought conditions may continue to worsen as we continue through the spring and into the summer months.
That's the vast majority of Nebraska. We are experiencing a pretty big and growing D3 in southwest Nebraska on up through central Nebraska and into northeast Nebraska. And then we're in a D2 across most of the state. Our programs really trigger based on the drought monitor, and we've got a number of programs that have already triggered. LFP, the livestock forage program that I mentioned earlier, is an important program for people that are experiencing forage loss. We're going to see that really across a good chunk of the state this year. And so we've got a lot of county offices that are already working on that. And then we're also allowing for haying and grazing in some of those drought emergency counties. If people are interested as to whether their CRP acres are eligible for drought emergency haying and grazing, they need to really contact their local office just to ensure that that has already been approved by the local county committee.
If you would like to learn more about USDA's drought assistance programs, there is a webinar which is scheduled for Thursday, May 12th. This webinar is part of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Center for Ag Profitability webinar series and will be devoted to the topics for farm and ranch management, profitability, economics, and farm survival. It is slated to begin at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, and those interested in participating can register online at cap.unl.edu. There is a URL at the bottom of your screen now. Shifting our attention over to the grain markets, this week we were joined by the president of Heartland Farm Partners, Jeff Peterson. We began that discussion with Jeff by getting his take on the current trajectory of the grain market. Joining us now to discuss the markets is Jeff Peterson, the president of Heartland Farm Partners. Jeff, always great to have you back on Market Journal.
You bet. I always enjoy being here and talking about the markets price.
As we began the week, it seemed like there was a plethora of bullish news to drive this market higher, but that's not what happened, especially on Monday. We saw follow through with that on Tuesday. What's going on with this market right now that led us to some downward pressure there to start the week?
Well, I think the biggest thing you look at in here is that you have to think about the markets built on perceptions of what's going to come, and we've built in a lot of bullishness. We've ran this market up, and we do reach a point when we can't. It's hard just to feed enough extra news, and then we ultimately end up getting some profit taking there, where the traders do step in and try to take some profits off the table that they physically made when the market's been going higher. So I would sum that up, and because we've got so many different parts of not only the U.S. but across the world that's impacting where the markets are going, that's what we'd pretty much see, Bryce.
You mentioned a word there that a viewer chimed in and asked if I could ask you about this. That's profit taking. For someone not familiar with what that is, bring us up to speed.
Yeah, the easiest way probably to describe the profit taking, so think about it this way. When the market's working at higher, you've continually got traders, and usually we call them kind of the managed money, and they're just trying to pick a trend, and so they're continually buying the futures as we're going up higher. And then at a certain point in there, when maybe they think the market's peaked out, or maybe they think there's a risk that it's going to turn, then they're just going to offset their position or sell back that long that they had purchased, and that's where we come up with that term profit taking. Now, we talked about a situation when the market's going up. You can have profit taking when the market's going down, but instead of physically, selling to have that profit taking, if somebody, and you've got a market going down, they just physically buy back that contract that they sold.
Well, as we look at these markets this week, Jeff, a lot of planters are parked in the shed due to some widespread rain we've seen, particularly here in the western Corn Belt. That was certainly welcome for producers who are facing drought conditions, but leaves time to think about how much, for the producer out there, how much worry should we be setting on the fact that planters haven't really been rolling at the pace that some people are used to at this point. Your take? Yeah,
it definitely is. We're getting closer to it being a concern. The market's starting to pay a little bit more of attention. From our side of it, one of the things we're watching, we know we've got a WSDA report coming up on May 12th, and we're really curious to see what USDA does on the yield side. And as we dig in and look at that yield side, a couple things from the past, we're at 14% planted right now. If we look back in time, back in 2013, we'd actually only been 5% planted. And coming into the May report back in 2013, they actually lowered the yield from the outlook meeting to the May yield down 5 bushels. Now in 2011, what was interesting, the yield, or the planting progress was 13%, but they still lowered the yield 3.6. But then to throw a curve in all that, in 2019, when the planting progress for this week was only setting at 15%, there was no adjustment. So there's enough uncertainty there, but that could be a surprise to the market if for some reason NASS did adjust that yield coming into this report.
We talk about planting progress here domestically, Jeff, but also want to ask you what you've been able to learn about planting progress in Ukraine, what they've been able to see thus far.
Yeah, they're moving along. What it kind of looks like, and I'll kind of break it down this way, Bryce, is that overall for their spring planted crops, and if we just look at how much they got planted versus what they planted last year, on their spring crops, they'd be about 38% planted. But if we dig in a little bit deeper and look at the corn, based off of where they're at right now versus what they planted last year, they'd be sitting at about 23% planted. They're running a little bit behind where they were last year. What we're hearing overall is that they've got enough seed, fertilizer, and chemicals. If they haven't got it bought and placed on their farm, they can still get it. But what we do know is they aren't going to get everything planted that they did last year, mainly because probably in the occupied areas or where you've got some fighting going on in the war between Russia and Ukraine, there's probably 25 to 30% of the acres in those areas that won't get planted. So, we're probably going to come in 65% planted of last year. So that's what it looks like right now.
What do you know about the stocks they currently have on hand?
Yeah, the stocks on hand are gradually moving some bushels out. To give you an idea, when they were peaking out, they were probably able to move about 6 million metric tons per month, maybe even 6.5 million metric tons per month. But now, honestly, they're down to moving about 600,000 metric tons per month. And they're doing that by rail, where before they were railing it down and sending it out the ports. The other side that gets interesting actually is how it's having an impact on their sunflower crush industry too. They're the #1 exporter of sunflower oil. They used to, before ultimately this war happened, they were crushing about 1.5 million metric tons. per day, and actually now they're backing off to running about 300,000 metric tons, and that's, excuse me, that wasn't per day, that was per month price.
As we wrap up today's conversation, Jeff, obviously there's a lot of factors in this market right now, but what kind of risk management advice would you like to leave our viewers with today?
You know, we've got a lot of uncertainty in this market, and I think this is the type of market where even though it feels like it can keep going higher, and we don't think we've seen a high end, we also have to recognize that we do need to be making some sales, and there's nothing wrong with physically making some sales, putting a call against it, or just buying a put against bushels as a way just to get a floor underneath it, because these are good prices, and our biggest risk that we physically don't want to have is have some surprise, and that's what we know we're going to have. We're going to have a surprise out of somewhere that will turn the market over eventually.
It's not if, it's when, it sounds like. Jeff, always appreciate you coming on the Market Journal to share your insights.
You bet. Always love doing it.
Thanks again to Jeff for his time this week. Now next week we'll be joined by Mike Briggs of Briggs Feed Yard in Seward, Nebraska. If you have a question you'd like for me to ask Mike, be sure to email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll be sure to pass that question along. Up next, pesticide drift is not just a concern for environmental agencies. It's also a concern to applicators, producers, and their neighbors. We recently had the opportunity to sit down with an environmental program specialist with the Nebraska Department of Agriculture to discuss Field Watch and how this program can be a benefit for applicators and producers alike. We're joined now by Craig Romery. He's the environmental program specialist with the Nebraska Department of Agriculture. Craig, we want to talk about Field Watch today and some of the platforms with that, but broadly speaking, what is Field Watch?
Well, Field Watch is a series of registries for communicating between pesticide applicators and specialty crop growers across the state. And the main purpose is to reduce the instances of drift to those specialty crops, which certainly can have crop damage and cause some problems there. And many of these sites are small and maybe hidden from view, and so having this map and these registries available is a benefit. And so there's 3 registries. One's called Field Check, and that's for pesticide applicators to use, where they can sign up and get some features from the system. Drift Watch is for specialty crop users, and they are the ones that are creating accounts and putting their sites on the map. And then there's a registry for just commercial beekeepers. Again, they're creating an account and putting their apiary sites on the map.
So as you mentioned, people have already added a lot of data to this website, and I think the message we're out there sharing today here on Market Journal is the fact that data is available for our producers out there as well as commercial applicators. Talk about how a user can actually physically go onto that website.
Well, again, it's for these different users groups to prevent pesticide drift. So when I say pesticide, that is all encompassing. That can be herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, and so forth. And it's mainly for outdoor applicators, so that that have the potential to drift, and so we're trying to prevent that. And those people could be farmers, commercial applicators, acreage owners, mosquito control applicators, state and county vegetation management people. And so they would go to the website, and I'll give that a link for that. They would create an account and then get whatever benefit they want from that.
Mm-hmm. Talk about getting onto that website. What's the website, that people can go there, and what are some of the details they need to know?
So I would encourage them to go to our Nebraska Department of Agriculture webpage, and the short link for that is bit.ly/NDAFWinfo, or you can go to nda.nebraska.gov and search for Field Watch. And that page, there's links at the top for applicators. There's also links in the middle for specialty crop growers, and then on down the line there's a link for beekeepers.
Speaking for myself, when I was on there, there's a lot of helpful information on there for producers and commercial applicators out there. But from your perspective, why is it important that a producer takes advantage of this data out there?
Well, you can again, it's for reducing pesticide drift. You may not know those folks are out there, even if they're relatively close to your farm or your ranch. There's a value to knowing where those non-herbicide tolerant crops are if you're spraying nearby. And there are several pesticide, herbicide labels that have restrictions or precautions on what to do if you're spraying nearby those crops. And then one of the other features is called seed field check. This is for detasselers mainly in Nebraska, but other field workers. Those sites will come on a day before they're planned and the day of the field workers being there. And then, and again, we're talking about human health there as opposed to crop health, but to prevent drift and potential exposures for field workers who are in the field.
Sounds like a handy tool for folks to take advantage of. What else would you like to add for our audience today?
Well, just take a look at the site. It's, again, free and fairly easy to do. And I would encourage folks to register as an applicator. Specialty crop growers and other crop growers can add their information as well. And if there's any questions, they can contact me. And the phone number is 471-2351, or they can find my email address on our Department of Ag website also.
Very good. Well, thank you for the information. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The registration for this program is quick and easy. If you'd like to learn more about Drift Watch, Field Check, or Bee Check, simply tap the link that we've shared over on the Market Journal website. The 94th Nebraska FFA State Convention recently concluded in Lincoln, gathering more than 6,000 members from all across the state for competitions, career exploration, and leadership development events. That is what FFA is all about. At this year's state convention came a new slate of state FFA officers, 600 plus state FFA degree recipients, and scores of others competing for awards. You can learn 10 ways that FFA is growing tomorrow's ag leaders in the latest issue of the Nebraska Farmer. Well, it is now time for weather with Nebraska Extension ag climatologist and Market Journal chief meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al is off this week, but he did leave us with some details to be mindful of concerning the most recent La Niña forecast that was released.
Thank you, Bryce. The reason that we're not doing the regular forecast this week is that I'm up in Michigan again doing my annual pilgrimage to the orchard, see how bad I can beat my body up before I come back to Lincoln. We'll do the regular forecast next week, but I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to give you an update on the expected La Niña type forecast that was put out by CPC during the middle of this month. First and foremost, let's take a conditional look at the equatorial Pacific. Sea surface temperatures highlighted with below normal conditions in blue, with the most intense of that coming up at the surface in the eastern equatorial Pacific. This is a response basically to some warming coming initially into the eastern equatorial Pacific that started this onslaught of storm system on the west coast, and then we've seen that pulse of cold water that is now moving up, and really that kind of coincided with when we've seen a lot of these cold, very cold temperatures set up this last month across much of the northern plains. But if you look to the west, underneath the equatorial Pacific, we're starting to rebuild that warm pool, and it's starting to make its way into the central equatorial Pacific, and most likely will be the next surge will come in as we go through the month of May. Whether or not we go forward in time with this La Niña event really depends on which models you look at. And if we look at the global consensus of the models, look at the averages, they all basically move across the ½ degree Celsius below normal line, which is basically the delineation for La Niña and neutral conditions. However, the two models that are persistently cool and what are basing on CPC's forecast is the NCEP model and the NASA model, and they are way out of sync with the other models. So either they're going to be really geniuses in terms of the forecast, or they're going to be out to lunch compared to the consensus of the models. That is very important because in the latest drought monitor outlook going forward in time, and this is basically the seasonal forecast, showing an expansion of dryness all the way through Iowa, southern Minnesota, eastern South Dakota, eastern Kansas, and northwestern Missouri. Now remember, this was based on the release of the seasonal forecast on the 17th. If we look at those, basically it was indicating above normal temperatures across most of the southern portions of the Rockies with the most intense chance, but most of Nebraska has generated basically a moderate to a high level confidence of above normal temperatures based on the CPC outlook. And this trend continues all the way through the July through September forecast before we start to see it slide back toward the west and southwest. In terms of precipitation, of course, the most recent forecast of the 17th, based on below normal moisture, centered over the Texas Panhandle, southwestern Kansas, moving all the way up into southwestern Nebraska, and they expanded that all the way into western Iowa, and then the very slight chance into eastern Iowa with the above normal precipitation well off to our east. In terms of the forecast going forward from CPC, indicating that this trend will continue and expand through the entire central plains and northern plains as we go through the heart of the summer, and then we don't see it start to return back to equal chances of above normal, normal, below normal until we get into that August through October period. So if the consensus models are more right, we won't probably see as grave of a situation in regards to the below normal precipitation, but of course we're going to continue to need to see periodic, very significant precipitation events through this month of May and into early June. Otherwise, we are just not going to have enough subsoil moisture to carry us through the season, particularly in the dryland environment and for our ranching community.
Thank you for the information, Al. We certainly appreciate that. Finally, today, Nebraska producers have evaluated practices to increase soybean yield and profit through the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network. In 2021, Nebraska farmers completed a 3-year on-farm research study to evaluate management practices that could potentially increase soybean yield and profitability. Market Journal's Bill Dodd has this story with the details of the findings of that study.
With planting season underway and strong momentum for soybean prices, many soybean producers may be pondering ways to improve their yields and profitability. Results from a recent collaborative multi-university on-farm research study that tested planting date, seeding rates, as well as fungicide and insecticide applications have proven to be fruitful in terms of increasing yield and profitability for soybean producers.
Therefore, what we did in this project was to collect first farmers' data and analyze this farmer-reported data to try to understand what will be the main limiting factors limiting crop yields across soybean fields in the entire region. And once we identify those factors limiting yield through the analysis of this survey data, we then design cropping systems based on the results from this analysis. And then we went back to the farmer fields and we evaluate how these new design systems compare with the traditional farmer management.
Based on the information gathered from soybean producers across the state, the research team designed improved management strategies and treatments that were compared against previous management practices as the baseline for the experiment. Across the 3-year span of this experiment, there was a noticeable uptick in both yield potential and profitability.
Treatment included early planting date. In some other cases, involved an adjustment in the maturity group. In other cases, involve an application of fungicide or insecticide around R3 stage. And in most of the cases also involve a reduction on the seeding rate, because we explicitly designed this treatment not only to increase the yield, but also to increase the farmer profitability. We ran this evaluation over 3 years, again, 150 experiments. And what we found was that on average, our improved treatment, designed based on the information derived from the analysis of the farmer data, resulted on a yield increase that on average was 3 to 6 bushels per acre higher compared with the reference farmer treatment. And in terms of profit, our improved treatment increased farmer profitability by $30 to $50 per acre on average across the 3 years.
In short, this study has shown that improvements in yield and profitability don't hinge solely on increasing your input costs. In fact, based on improved management practices and virtually no additional cost for producers, average yield and profit per acre were noticeably enhanced.
Well, I think the take-home message here is that there are still many things that farmers can do to improve their productivity and profitability by tactical changes on the management practices. In some cases, those practices will involve higher inputs, but in many cases what they require are knowledge inputs. And an example of that is, for example, shifting towards early planting date and reducing seeding rates. Those are examples of things that actually doesn't require extra money or extra cost. It's just about changing something in the cropping system to increase the profitability. So I guess the take-home message for farmers is, next time before thinking about trying to push yields higher by increasing your costs or your inputs, think first about what you can do what you can do to improve yield and profitability by changing things on the cropping systems that don't require additional dollars coming from your pocket.
While the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's on-farm research does add another variable for producers to consider when planning for planting and growing their crops, the results these experiments can yield are oftentimes very rewarding for the participants, and there may still be time to contribute to the on-farm research program in the 2022 season.
Well, I encourage all farmers in Nebraska to participate in the Farm Research Network. It provides a great platform to evaluate different management practices, alternatives, to learn a lot, not only about yourself, but also from other farmers. And I believe, again, as I said at the beginning, that there is a great opportunity for farmers to learn about new practices that can help them to increase yield and profitability. And from our side at the university, we keep trying to learn more about what farmers can do and inform them about practices that will help them not only to increase yields, but also make their enterprise more profitable and sustainable.
From precision ag technologies to improved management practices, UNL's on-farm research may include a bit more work and strategy when it comes to your overall operation. However, the results that can be achieved can prove to be well worth the extra effort. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thank you for that story, Bill. If you'd like to learn more about these specific on-farm research projects, we've added a link to the Crop Watch article, which details the results of the experiments, to the Market Journal website. That article also has helpful information for anyone who might be interested in participating in UNL's on-farm research program. Well, that is all the time we have for this week's show. Remember, if you missed a story, be sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and that you follow us on social media to join in on that conversation. We hope to see you back here next time. Until then, I'm Bryce Duskett. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.